Recording is in progress. Okay. Do you hear me? You guys hear me?
Yeah. Is it
Oh, yes.
possible to
Good.
put the link
Great.
for the documents in the chat?
Um, I think I can do that. Can you see it on the screen?
No. I
Oh,
see a very small part, but I can't see the whole thing.
that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, hold on. I think I have to save it to why is that? I'm going to try stop share. Okay, let's try sharing again. Can you see it now? No. Why is that?
It's there now.
Say it again.
I can see it now.
You can see it. Paul, can you see it?
I'm sorry, I forgot I was muted. Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right.
Thanks.
All right, great. So we're going to get started. Welcome. We have come pretty far. I've done there's obviously lots of material that we could read, and I feel like I've picked shall we say, my own personal favorites throughout the history of modern political Zionism. I'm realizing that as we get to the end here, this is our fifth hour. There's so much that we've missed, and so I'm going to recommend, of course, that do all the research you can on your own. Rabbi Sugarman pointed out last week that there was an update to the Herzberg book. The Herzberg collection is what we'll be reading. He wrote this collection called The Zionist Idea, that's published in the early '60s. Grab a sheet. And Gil Troy updated. He took that material and then updated it with more stuff, and of course there have been developments since the middle of the 20th century as well in Zionism. And it's that book is called The Zionist Ideas, and is I got a copy. It's worth getting. But what we're going to do in this session is we're going to look at some of the later Zionists, later meaning from as late as the 1930s, to hit some of, yeah, if you could pull that close, that'd be great. To hit some of the folks that we have not, that are important names that I think many of which you will actually recognize, but are important to know in terms of Zionism moving forward from the early years into the 20th century, into the establishment of the State of Israel. So we're going to cover today. We're going to start with Solomon Schechter, a name that is very familiar in the conservative world, but of course, Schechter was a Zionist, and that was an early important point for the founding of the conservative movement. Rabbi Avraham Yitzhak Kook, who is the first chief rabbi of Mandate Palestine. So he's there all the way back into the teens and then the 20s. So we'll cover him a little bit. Justice Louis Brandeis, whom is a name that you also should know, not only because there's a university named after him. He died before it was established, but he was, of course, the first Jewish Supreme Court judge, and also a Zionist. Rabbi Judah Leon Magnus is the founder of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And his voice is important here as well. And he and Martin Buber will be the next to last one we get to. I have a special surprise at the end, but I'm going to have to move fast to get there. But Martin Buber, of course, taught at the Hebrew University, although he's one of the greatest names among contemporary Jewish philosophers. But also he has a very interesting story. He and Magnus together were part of a group that advocated for a two-state solution way before anyone was talking about the two-state solution. So that's also an interesting thing that we'll hear about today. So without further ado, I'm going to ask that we say the bracha for Torah study, because I consider this Torah, and we should all make note of the fact that we're learning together. There is a bracha for that. If you have not already said it today, it ends with la'asok b'divrei Torah. Please recite with me: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to God who's given us this framework of mitzvot through which we can fill our lives with holiness, and in particular the obligation, to the imperative to engage with words of Torah. So let's jump right into Solomon Schechter. So again, like I said, that's a name that is familiar to many of us, mostly because of the conservative Jewish day schools that were named after him. But Solomon Schechter is a scholar who is born in Romania. His dates are 1847 to 1915. He's born in Romania. He has as with most of the early Zionists, has a strong background in traditional Jewish studies and Talmud Torah, you might say. But he went on as a young man to study in Vienna, to study Talmud from the what comes to be known in the 19th century as from the perspective of Das Wissenschaft des Judentums, the science of Judaism, which is a sort of a new way of looking at Jewish texts that emerges in the middle of the 19th century, to take the scientific approach, the critical approach to Jewish texts. He goes to England in 1882. Because he's invited there by the great financier Claude Montefiore to teach him Talmud, and then he becomes associated with Cambridge. He's best known for having been the person who initiated research into the Cairo Geniza. Now, without spending a lot of time on this, Cairo was a place where in the old synagogue in Fustat, in the Jewish neighborhood of Cairo, where they had collected about 1,000 years worth of old Jewish books. That, a Geniza is a place where you store books or bury books that are worn out and used. And a couple of English ladies were traveling in Egypt this is I believe in the 1880s. And they encounter in the souk, in the Arab market in Cairo. Somebody sells them these pieces of their pages from books with Hebrew writing on them, and they don't know what they are. So they go back to London, and they bring him to Solomon Schechter, who says, "Oh my God, where did you get this?" And then spends a lot of time trying to discover whatever he can about the materials in the Cairo Geniza. Those are studies, by the way, that go on to this very day, just so you know. So Solomon Schechter was known for his research on Talmud and Jewish studies, and he's brought to head the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York in 1902. He becomes the chancellor of JTS, which is where, of course, I learned to be a rabbi. But through all of this, he is an early Zionist, and we're going to read some of the things that he wrote about Zionism. And he sees Zionism as being very important, and basically he uses the term bulwark up front against anti-Semitism, that it will ultimately keep Jews Jewish. So I need a volunteer to read on page 506 there at the top, where it says, "To me personally." Volunteer to read. Go ahead, Ken.
To me personally, after long hesitation and careful watching, Zionism recommended itself as a great bulwark against assimilation. By assimilation, I do not understand what is usually understood by Americanization, namely that every Jew should do his best to acquire the English language, that he should study American history and make himself acquainted with the best productions of American literature, like he should be a law-abiding citizen, thoroughly appreciating the privilege of being a member of this great commonwealth, and joyfully prepared to discharge duties of American citizenship.
Okay, I want to point out, by the way, it's hard to see at the top, this is written in 1906. So he's been in New York for several years now, and he's seeing the phenomenon of American assimilation. Keep going.
What I understand by assimilation is loss of identity, or that process of disintegration which, passing through various degrees of defiance of all Jewish thought and of disloyalty to Israel's history and its mission, terminates variously in different lands.
Right. So he's very concerned what he sees in America already, and this is very relatively early in there'll be greater waves of Jewish immigration into America in the coming decades after this. But already he sees that America is so free and open that it's very easy for Americans to just sort of assimilate and get lost into this great big Goyish experiment in democracy, right? And so what happens? Did you get the text? There's text down here. Okay, all right, we'll get there. So we're reading Solomon Schechter. It's called A Statement. Zionism, a Statement, published in 1906. I don't know if it's in the newer. Is that the Hertzberg? Okay, yeah. Page 506. So he's very concerned already in 1906 that the Jews in America are losing their Judaism. Okay, go on. There's more to it. This is actually very interesting, but go on. In Germany,
for instance, where the pressure from above in favor of the dominant religion was very strong, it ends in direct and public apostasy. In other countries where this pressure has been removed, it results in a severance of all affiliation with the synagogue. It's followed by a sort of eclectic religiosity that coquettes. What does that mean? Coquettes.
I don't know. Keep going. Coquettes with various. Yeah, it flirts with the various churches. Yeah.
It's churches, not neglecting even the Christian Science temple. And is consummated by a final, though imperceptible, absorption in the great majority. This consummation will surely be hastened by the gradual disappearance of social disparity. What this process finally means for Judaism will perhaps be best seen from the following quotation from Wellhausen's History of Israel.
Okay, I got to pause here and explain who Julius Wellhausen is. So Wellhausen is is a German Protestant scholar who in the 19th century is the first person to propose that the Torah is written by 4 different authors. That he refers to as JEPND, the Yahvist, the Elohist, the priestly author, and the Deuteronomistic author, that is generally called the documentary hypothesis. Schechter did not like the documentary hypothesis because number one, these German Protestant theologians who were writing about it were largely perceived to be anti-Semitic, and their agenda was to sort of take the air out of the Jews' Torah, to sort of like take it away from the Jews and take away the holiness of the Torah. And so Schechter saw that as being sort of a shot across the bow in terms of assimilation and anti-Semitism. So that's Wellhausen, and he's going to quote from Wellhausen's book. Go on.
After hearing Spinoza's oft-quoted view regarding the possibilities of the absorption of Israel by its surroundings, the well-known Bible critic remarks, the persistency of the race may, of course, prove a harder thing to overcome than Spinoza supposed. But, nevertheless, it will be found to have spoken truly in declaring that the so-called emancipation of Jews must inevitably lead to the extinction of Judaism wherever the process is extended beyond the political to the social sphere.
Right. So Spinoza, also a controversial figure in Jewish history, despite the fact that he himself was Jewish. Maybe you know that Spinoza was subject to a 500-year ban, a cherem, from because of the writings that he had publicized in Holland in the 16th century. Spinoza predicts that eventually the Jews are going to let go of Judaism, and Wellhausen has sort of latched onto that and says, well, it didn't happen fast enough, more or less, but it will, because the extinction of Judaism is coming to us because of the emancipation of the Jews. Okay, so again, so Schechter latches onto that as sort of a symbol of Western German anti-Semitism. They're hoping the Jews will go away, more or less, is what he's saying. Skip over to, Ken, if you pick it up at page 507, where it says Zionism declares boldly in the middle there, about sort of the way to...
Declares boldly to the world that Judaism means to preserve its life by not losing its life. It shall be true and it shall be a true and healthy life, with a policy of its own, a religion wholly its own, invigorated by sacred memories and sacred environments, and proving a tower of strength and of unity not only for the remnant gathered within the borders of the Holy Land, but also for those who shall, by choice or necessity, prefer what now constitutes the galut.
Galut is another word for dispersion or diaspora. Okay, so what Schechter is saying is that it's Zionism that will save us, not just the folks who are going to move to Palestine and establish there the state of Israel, but also for all the rest of us, because it is a resurgence of Jewish nationalism, of this sense of belonging to the Jewish nation. Flip over to 508 down at the bottom there. Somebody else want to read the rebirth of Israel's national consciousness? Go ahead. See where we are?
The rebirth of Israel's national consciousness and the revival of Israel's religion, or to use a shorter term, the revival of Judaism, are inseparable. When Israel found itself, it found its God. When Israel lost itself or began to work at its self-effacement,
Effacement,
it was sure to deny its God. The selection of Israel, the indestructibility of God's covenant with Israel, the immortality of Israel as a nation, and the final restoration of Israel to Palestine, where the nation will live a holy life on holy ground with all the wide-reaching consequences of the conversion of humanity and the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth. All these are the common ideals and the common ideas that permeate the whole of Jewish literature, extending over nearly 4,000 years.
Yeah, that's enough, really. So what he says basically is that Zionism is this rebirth of this national consciousness, which will awaken everybody to all of the principles that have been established from our throughout our history, that Israel is the center of Jewish life, and that we belong to this land, and that is an important part of our brit, of our covenant with God, effectively. This bit about when Israel found itself, it found its God. That without this sense of national connectedness, we cannot really fulfill the religious aspect of what it means to be Jewish. That's what Schechter says. Question, yes.
You're saying Schechter says that to be an unassimilated American Jew is to be a Zionist.
No, on the contrary. On the contrary, he says that. Well, okay, I guess you could make the case as long as you're connected to the principle of Zionism, which is the sum total of Jewish literature and history. I guess I see what you're doing. Yes, possibly. He certainly thinks that, he actually goes on, we're not going to read it, but he goes on to talk about how Zionism has already sort of awakened this sense of national consciousness, even amongst those who are already assimilated. Okay, so I guess that would support what you said. Yes, but he also thinks that that's bringing people back to synagogue as well. And by the way, just as a side note, that's working now. That is a phenomenon that is happening in this very world at this moment, given the events of the last year and a half. Just throwing that out there. Yes, there are people that are coming to me that have never been part of a synagogue in their life. I've actually spoken with a couple of them in recent days. I mean, this is a real thing that's happening.
Then they're both
right now.
The more hate, the more people. So the more people are hating us, the more we come back to the synagogue. Not the more dispersed. Every time it comes back around to hate, we come back.
I'm sorry to say that too is also a phenomenon in Jewish life. I mean, let's face it. I'm certainly not glorifying the bad old days in the shtetl, right? The shtetl was awful. I mean, we have this sort of romantic notion of a fiddler on the roof. Like, it was great because we all knew our role and we all knew where we stood. But of course, they were subject to pogroms and oppression and persecution and anti-Semitism in the shtetl. However, it also kept the Jews together, right? You might say that that's a good thing, but it also certainly came with a lot of bad. So yes. Okay, tell you what, we got a lot to cover, so I'm sorry we're going to have to move on. But I'm going to move fast because like I said, I want to get to the special surprise at the end. Okay, Rabbi Kook. Rav Kook is the first chief rabbi of Mandate Palestine. For those of you who don't know, most countries in the world where there are Jews, there are chief rabbis. America is one where there is. Thankfully, there is not, which is a good thing. We don't. you don't really want chief rabbis. It's problematic in Israel. It's problematic everywhere. But it chiefly applies in places where there is no separation of church and state. It's a quasi-governmental position. So he's born in Latvia. He went to the Volozhin Yeshiva, which is a well-known yeshiva in Lithuania. Was clearly brilliant. Loved to speak Hebrew, which was seen as problematic, by the way, in his day and age. His years are 1865 to 1935. And Rav Kook was even at the yeshiva, he would speak to people in Hebrew, and it was clear that that they're all looking at him funny, like, what do you do? Why do you speak Yiddish like everybody else? But he went on to serve a few communities in Latvia and Lithuania, although he really felt from a young age that his true call was to move to Israel. He moves to Jaffa, to Yafo in 1904. And remember, that's before Tel Aviv is established in 1909. But so he's in Jaffa, and he starts to write about Zionism. He's already on to the idea that secular Jewish nationalism is an expression of what Herzberg calls the divine endowment of the Jewish soul and a forerunner of the Messiah. So Rav Kook has this definitely a religious angle. He's not a secular Zionist. He's not a cultural Zionist. He's not a labor Zionist. He is a religious Zionist. But it's very important for him. He sees the rebuilding of the state of Israel as being deeply connected to as sort of like a forerunner of the messianic redemption. Okay. By the way, we still say this, those of you who are paying attention, when we say Birkat Hamazon at Beth Shalom, we say Harachaman, statement in the end, Harachaman Yivarech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzemichat Geulatenu. May the merciful one bless the state of Israel, which is the beginning of the flowering of our messianic redemption. Reshit Tzemichat Geulatenu. Okay, and it's something that is still part of our liturgy. 1909, Rav Kook is probably best known for what is known as an agricultural heter. There's this problem of it. Well, if you're living in Israel, you have to follow the sabbatical year, right? So the sabbatical year means that you can't actually grow any produce, or the produce that you cultivate in the seventh year cannot be eaten. So he produces a heter, a rabbinic permission to allow the fledgling kibbutzim and moshavim that are producing, agricultural produce for the first time now, so that they won't all go under, to be able to sell and eat their produce that is grown even the sabbatical year. That's still in place today, although it's quite controversial within Orthodoxy in Israel. He goes back to Europe for some time. He's actually in England during the negotiations of over the Balfour Declaration, serving a pulpit. He goes back to Palestine in 1919 to be the chief Ashkenazic rabbi, and he serves until he dies in 1935. So what we're going to read is something from his published works, which were collected in 1942. So it's funny because it says the land of Israel here is dated 1910 to 1930, but I'm assuming it's on the earlier side of that. I don't really know. Okay, another volunteer to read. Go ahead, Margaret, please. Yes. Oh, question. Yes.
No, this is a question. I have particular love for Rev Kook. My grandfather went to Yeshiva Rev Kook. He was born in 1900 and lived in Jerusalem. And I got all sorts of stories about him and his growing up. If you want to talk to me, but I'm not going to do this now. He moved here in 1924 via El Salvador. But so I love him.
Thank
Eretz
you. Okay.
Yisrael is not something apart from the soul of the Jewish people. It is no mere national possession, serving as a means of unifying our people and boosting its material or even its spiritual survival. Eretz Yisrael is part of the very essence of our nationhood. It is beyond organically to its very life and inner being. Human reason, even at its most sublime, cannot begin to understand the unique holiness of Eretz Yisrael. It cannot stir the depths of love for the land that are dormant within our people.
Now, these are, by the way, very bold, and even he's stating this as a fact. Eretz Israel is intimately tied to the essence of our nationhood. Not everybody agrees with him, but it is a powerful statement nonetheless. Keep going.
Eretz Israel means to the Jew can be felt only through the spirit of the Lord, which is in our people as a whole. Through the spiritual cast of the Jewish soul, which radiates its characteristic influence to every healthy emotion. This higher light shines forth to the degree that the spirit of divine holiness fills the hearts of the saints and scholars of Israel. with heavenly life and bliss.
I mean, his writing is very is beautiful. Keep going, keep going.
To regard Eretz Israel is merely a tool for establishing our national unity, or even for sustaining our religion in the diaspora by preserving its proper character and its faith. Hiding the piety and observances is a sterile notion.
Wow. By the way, so what's he saying there? By the way, for sustaining our religion in the diaspora. Oh, sorry. He actually, sorry. Let's finish the sentence first. Go ahead. Is a sterile notion.
It is unworthy of the holiness of Eretz Israel.
I mean, it's actually he's contradicting what Schechter just said. Schechter just said actually the life of the Jew in diaspora is actually going to be sustained by Zionism in the presence of Jews in the land of Israel. But Rav Kook is saying no, actually that's not enough. You should be in Israel is what he really feels. Go on.
When I say that a valid strengthening of Judaism in diaspora can only come from a deepened attachment to Eretz Israel. The hope for the return of to the Holy Land is the continuing source of the distinctive nature of Judaism. The hope for the redemption is the force that sustains Judaism in the diaspora. The Judaism of Eretz Israel is the very redemption.
Right. So you can see he really very strongly believes that Israel is this part of redemption, that redemption will come from the return to Israel. I just wanted to give you a taste of Rav Kook. There's so much more to read, but again, I'm worried that we're not going to get to everybody we want to get to. So yes, we're going to move on to Lewis. Actually, any observations about what we just read from Rav Kook? Did you had something to say? Did you want to add it?
Well, first of all, it's funny that my grandfather moved here.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of bad going on in 1924. But I also feel like, my kids have pretty much assimilated, but my siblings who both live in Israel, their kids have not. I think he's right.
Thank you. Okay. And by the way, there's good statistical information to support that. I was actually just reading this morning a recent report on the number of Jews born Jewish who have remained Jewish today. And in America, that figure is about 76% in America. This was data, I think is probably from one of the Pew Research recent studies. In Israel, the figure is 100%. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about Justice Louis Brandeis. His dates are 1856 to 1941. He's born in, of all places, Louisville, Kentucky, to parents who had immigrated from Prague. He was completely secular. He had virtually no communication with a Jewish community, no religious education. He studied in Europe and at Harvard. He got a law degree in 1877. Now, I'm not going to say anything about Brandeis's legal credits, but they are obviously impressive and extensive. As I said, he became a Supreme Court justice. He had an uncle who was religious, who was also Zionist, and I guess this uncle had some influence on him. In 1912, he has a formative conversation with Jacob Dahaz, who is the editor of the Boston Jewish newspaper, who leads, and at this point, he's got a long and established legal career. So this leads to his becoming the secretary of the first Zionist Congress. Oh, sorry, Dahaz was the first secretary of the first Zionist Congress, but Brandeis joins the Federation of American Zionists after this conversation in 1912, and he eventually becomes the leader because what happens during World War I, remember World War I begins in 1914, the central Zionist offices at the time were in Berlin. And so basically all of the Allied countries are outside of that sphere. And so America becomes, for the first time, the focal point of Zionist activity. And Louis Brandeis is actually, he becomes the head of the Provisional Executive Committee for General Zionist Affairs. And he's present at the negotiations for the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Balfour Declaration basically said it was the first statement by the Brits, who now control who now control Palestine, that a Jewish, Her Majesty's government views, or is it his, I guess it's His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. Something I'm paraphrasing more or less what the Balfour Declaration says, but that was a big deal in 1970. The first statement that there might actually be a state to come. There's at the Pittsburgh Zionist Convention, 1980. Pittsburgh figures large in this story. At the Pittsburgh Zionist Convention, 1918, Brandeis defined a 5-point code of social justice for the Jewish homeland with a focus on careful and business-like upbuilding. Interestingly enough, he was not interested in diaspora. He put his efforts onto, and by the way, that led to internal feuding in the American Jewish community because his interest was in Israel. But because he doesn't get along with some people in various organizations, he loses his position of leadership at the Cleveland convention in 1921. Boo, Cleveland. Okay, so continued involvement. He organized a number of corporations to help build in Palestine, and during much of this time, of course, he served on the Supreme Court. He was nominated by Woodrow Wilson in 1916. He served for 23 years. He's actually one of the most influential jurists in American history. So let's read a little of what this is actually a pretty important piece that he writes down here, page 519. This is in 1915. So already into World War I. And he writes down at the bottom, "Let no American imagine." I need a volunteer to read there. Audrey, go ahead.
Let no American imagine that Zionism is inconsistent with patriotism. Multiple loyalties are objectionable only if they are inconsistent. A man is a better citizen of the United States for being also loyal citizen of his state and of his city, for being loyal to his family and to his profession or trade, for being loyal to his college or his lodge. Every Irish American.
Remember lodges? I don't know if it's existing. Go ahead, yes.
Every Irish American who contributed towards advancing home rule was a better man and a better American for the sacrifices he made. Every American Jew who aids in advancing the Jewish settlement in Palestine, though he feels that neither he nor his descendants will ever live there, will likewise be a better man and a better American for doing so. Note what Seton Watson says.
That's the name of a British historian.
America is full of nationalities which, while accepting with enthusiasm their new American citizenship, nevertheless look to some center in the old world as the source and inspiration of their national culture and traditions. The most typical instance is the feeling of the American Jew for Palestine, which may well become a focus for his déplacé kinsmen in other parts of the world. There is no inconsistency between loyalty to America and loyalty to Jewry. The Jewish spirit, the product of our religion and experiences, is essentially modern and essentially American. Not since the destruction of the temple have the Jews in spirit and in ideals been so fully in harmony with the noblest aspirations of the country in which they live.
Thank you. Okay, so for Brandeis, now this is fascinating because it comes from actually he's the first one I think we've encountered who comes from basically no Jewish background. He feels that that he's latched onto this idea of Jewish nationalism as being a good thing for American Jewry. I mean, he's really one of these people who walks in off the street like, "Hi, Rabbi, I've never been in a synagogue before, but sign me up." And he latches onto it. He says, this will make the Jews better Americans because there's no challenge of loyalty. Sorry, somebody had something to say?
Yeah. So my question: did he remain secular throughout this? Or
I don't know otherwise, but the likelihood is yes. I mean, I don't think that he's not the kind of guy who, at age 60 is going to start observing Judaism. I believe. I think that his focus, and in fact, we know this because his focus is really on life in Israel and building Israel rather than building, let's say, the American diaspora or the diaspora in general. That would be my sense. I don't really know. Did he occasionally show up for Minyan on a Tuesday morning? Possibly, but it seems unlikely.
But his mindset is still secular, thinking about all this.
For sure. And remember that Zionism has a wide range. So there are like the devout secularists, there is no God, but there is Israel, and there are the religious Zionists as well, represented by Rav Kook. Something that I along the way that I realized that we never covered. We should have read something by A.D. Gordon. I'm sorry I didn't get to that. To talk about labor Zionism, the fact that there was a movement of people who really believed that the key to Jewish renewal would actually be working the land. Working the land in Israel, and so we might come back to that at the end. All right, so yeah, that's a sense of Brandeis, and I think this is very striking. Yes, go ahead.
Can't think of the name. Robert Troy was the cemetery. It's the labor movement.
The labor movements are
The workman's circle.
Yes.
Workman's Circle. Yes, very.
Is this an offshot of this?
The Workman's Circle was I mean, it still exists, I believe. I don't know that they were I don't know that they were a particularly Zionist group. They were certainly communist. And okay, tell you what, let's. Oh yeah, the Workman's Circle still exists. They have summer camps. They have they publish stuff. Okay, moving on. They speak Yiddish, or sort of, some of them. All right, moving on. We're gonna look at. We're doing great on time, so we should be all right here. Okay, so let's go on to Rabbi Judah Magnus. So Magnus. So he writes. We're gonna read a little bit of something from 1930, like All the Nations. Magnus is also American. He's born in San Francisco, and he attends. He's born in 1877. He lives until 1948. He attends Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. That's the teaching institution of the Reform movement. Becomes a Reform rabbi. He's ordained in 1900, and he serves a couple of pulpits. He ends up at a prominent synagogue in Brooklyn. And in 1908, he moves to Emmanuel, which is the big cathedral on Fifth Avenue in New York. And in 1911, he has a pulpit at B'nai Jeshurun. If you know New York synagogues at all, B'nai Jeshurun is still a very, very important conservative congregation. Worth noting that at the time, the Reform movement is still officially anti-Zionist. They don't latch on to the idea, accept the idea of Israel, of the state of Israel, until 1948. But Magnus is a pacifist, and particularly after the riots that took place in Palestine in 1929, he's working hard to prevent further war and bloodshed, and ultimately he's going to advocate for cooperation and a binational state. In 1925, he becomes the chancellor of the Hebrew University, which he helped to build. In 1935, he becomes the president, and he oversees the building of the campus on Mount Scopus. I'm not going to get into the geography right now, but you should know that that's where the primary campus is to this day of the Hebrew University. It was cut off from the years 1948 to 1967 because of that area. It was still is under Israeli control, but it was entirely surrounded by the state of Jordan until the Six-Day War in 1967. But Magnus is a very interesting author, again because of his angle as an American and as one who's seeking ultimately, as you'll see, a cooperation between Jews and Arabs. I need a volunteer to read the discussion concerning. We're on page 443, like All the Nations. A volunteer? Go ahead, Barry. Yeah.
The discussion concerning the future political regime in Palestine is now happily beginning to take on a more or less objective character. And the searching question is being asked as to what we want here. What is our Zionism? What does Palestine mean for us? As to what we should want here, I can answer for myself in almost the same terms that I have been in the habit of using many years. Immigration, settlement of the land, Hebrew life and culture. If you can guarantee these for me, I should be willing to yield the stiller state. In the Jewish majority, and on the other hand, I would agree to a legislative assembly together with a democratic political regime so carefully planned and worked out that the above three fundamentals would not be infringed.
Okay, so just to be clear, what Magnus is saying is that as long as Jews are allowed to immigrate to the land of Israel and to settle there and to build Hebrew life and culture, he's willing to give up on the idea of an exclusively Jewish state. In other words, he's seeking what some today might refer to as the one-state solution. That is to say, a binational state where there are Jews and Arabs in government and so forth. I mean, it is worth pointing out, by the way, that of course that is the reality of today's Israel. There are Arab members of Knesset, there are Arab judges. I don't know if binational is the right term, but it is certainly a multicultural, multi-religious country. But of course, 80% of the population is Jewish, and of course there are the territories, and on that entire strip of land, including all the territories, there is still a slight majority of Jews. Nonetheless, of course, in today's world, we're still trying to wrangle with this question of how do we serve them all with a democratic government and make life and eliminate the conflict, the wars that have been there more or less ceaselessly over the last century and more. So in any case, so he's willing to give that up. Go ahead and read a little more. Sorry, where did we leave off? Could not be infringed. Go ahead. Indeed.
I should be willing to pay almost any price for all these women, especially since this price would, in my opinion, also secure tranquility and mutual understanding. We should have said.
Right.
If the Jews really have an historical connection to Palestine, and what every American Jew.
No. What student of history will deny it? Flip that over.
444.
444 at the top. Mm-hmm.
Are they clean?
No. Somebody want to pick it up where? Go ahead, Ken. Just keep reading.
History will deny it. And if the Jewish people is to be in Palestine, not on sufferance as during the days of the Turks, but as of right, a right solemnly recognized by most governments and by the League of Nations, and also by thinking Arabs. And surely these three rights are elemental and hardly to be contested.
Right. So even though he's open to the idea of a binational state or multinational state, whatever the proper term is, these things are essential, allowing Jews to immigrate, to settle, and to build this Hebrew Zionist culture. Keep going, please.
Are you ready?
Whether keep going.
Whether through temperament or other circumstances, I do not at all believe, and I think the facts are all against believing, that without Palestine, the Jewish people is dying out or is doomed to destruction.
All right, so he doesn't believe that this is essential to Jewish life. Keep going, but
on the contrary, it's growing strong.
And he's talking about by the way, diaspora here. The diaspora is strengthening, he says. Go on.
On the contrary, it's growing stronger. And what's more, it should grow stronger, for Palestine without communities in the dispersion would be bereft of much of its significance as a spiritual center for the Judaism of the world. To me, it seems like there are three chief elements in Jewish life in the following order of importance. The living Jewish people, now some 16 million, the Torah, in the broadest sense of the term, i.e. all of our literature and documents in history, and as also the great religious and ethical and social ideals the Torah contains for use and development in the present and the future. And third, the land of Israel. My view is that the people in the Torah can exist and be creative as they have existed and have been created without the land. That, however, the land is one of the chief means, if not the chief means, of reviving and deepening the people and the Torah.
Right. So will the Jewish people carry on if the state of Israel is not established, says Magnus? The answer is yes. However, the presence of the state of Israel in the Jewish world will strengthen both Israel, of course, and the diaspora.
And where was he?
Yes. So he's already in Jerusalem.
And
He's
what
writing
time-
this.
what-
This is
what-
1930. So this is 1930. So it's after the riots of 1929, in which a number of Jewish people were killed. There were back and forth. Perhaps most notably, there was a sort of a massacre in Hebron at that time. And yet he says we must continue to fight for this, because we need this sense of the center of Jewish culture
There were 16 million Jews.
in the whole world. There are not that many more today, of course, because I think on the eve of the Holocaust there were 20 million Jews in the world. Hitler killed 6 million of them, and we've never actually, the number of Jewish people has never entirely recovered. I think there might be there's something around, sometimes I think that number is still good today. There's still about 16 million Jews in the world. Something like that. Okay. Let's skip down a bit. Go over to page 445 at the bottom. He does talk about how Palestine cannot solve the Jewish problem, the entire problem, the Jewish people. But somebody else to read. Unfortunately, bottom of page 445. Unfortunately, one hears most of that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Unfortunately,
Yes.
one hears most of that Zionism, which has not been a positive, hopeful relationship towards the tremendous, unique fact of the diaspora, but of despair.
Right. So there are some that are already saying in 1930 that maybe Israel is not such a great place to go to, because there's been this back and forth between Jews and Arabs there. It's only there for people who've got no better option, is kind of what some people might say. Keep going.
It is a Zionism that loathes the ghetto, which it identifies with the dispersion. And that is so in despair in the future of diaspora Judaism, and that in its own way loves Jews and Judaism so passionately that the further existence of Jews and Judaism is thought impossible with the present day Palestinian being made ready to act as savior.
Right. So again, he's sort of he's casting shade on the Zionism that on this sort of these negative ideas about Zionism. But please read a little more. Palestine.
Palestine is the center of this organism, but by no means all of it. The dispersion and Palestine are both required for the fullest development of the Jewish people.
Right. So in order for Judaism to thrive in the diaspora, it needs a state in Israel and vice versa.
That's
Yes.
true for 4,000 years.
We're yes.
Celebrating Passover, and
Okay.
there 400 years in Egypt, maybe not much longer before we kept getting dispersed down after.
Thank you for injecting a little bit from the Jewish bookshelf there. Of course, the Passover story is the archetype for Jewish redemption. And what does the Passover story conclude with? They leave Egypt, and where do they go? They go to Israel. By the way, just an aside about the Seder. So how many cups of wine do we? Sorry, I'm just being a rabbi. How many cups of wine do we have at the Seder? 4, or is it 5? Because there's a 5th one for Elijah. And those reflect 4 promises that are given to the Israelites upon the departure from Egypt. And the 5th one, which is not necessarily reflected amongst the 4 cups, but maybe in the cup of Elijah, is the promise to, I will bring you to the land of Israel. So the others are other types of redemption, but the 5th one is understood, the implicit nature of Elijah's cup. And in fact, it's not clear why it's Elijah's cup. That's another story. But is that cup symbolizes redemption to the point where of return to the land of Israel, which God had given to the Israelites. So yes, throughout Jewish history, that is something to which we have always looked. The Passover story is, of course, the beginning of that, is the first type of that redemption, but it's something we've always looked forward to. Let's skip over to 446. We're down again. I'm sorry to move so quickly through all this. Why we not move it up here? Okay, 446 in the middle. 3 great things this poor little land. Actually, you know what? Sorry, no, you know what? We're running short on time. We got to skip. Let's skip over to 454. No. Wait. There was one more. Oh no, 448. 448. Sorry about that. 448. In the first column, about 2/3 of the way down. What I am driving at. Another volunteer to read. So what I wasn't right.
Sure,
Okay.
I can read it.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Jessica.
Okay. What I am driving, what I'm driving at is to distinguish between two policies. The one maintains that we can establish a Jewish home here through the suppressing, through the suppression of the political aspirations of the Arabs, and therefore a home necessarily established on bayonets over a long period. A policy which I think bound to fail because of the violence against us it would occasion, and because good opinion in Britain and the conscience of the Jewish people itself would revolt against it. The other policy holds that we can establish a home here only if we are true to ourselves as Democrats and internationalists, thus being just and helpful to others, and that we ask for the protection of life and property, the while we are eagerly and intelligently and sincerely at work to find a modus vivendi et operandi. I'm guessing that's modus operandi with our neighbors. Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. A little bit more.
The world, not in Palestine alone, may be bent upon violence and bloodshed, but will not my opponent agree that there is a better chance of averting this tendency to bloodshed if we make every possible effort, politically as well as in other ways, to work hand in hand as teachers, helpers, friends with this awakening Arab world?
Yes, great. So what he's saying is that, well, yes, it is important for us to build this state of Israel. On the other hand, it is also, we don't want it to be like we're clutching our rifles in foxholes for forever and ever. And I'm sorry to say that, here we are in 2025, and Israel doesn't actually have any official borders. It has ceasefire lines. So there's a certain prescience to what Magnus is saying. Of course, it's always more complicated. It's very easy to write, political screeds in 1930 and say, this is the way we should do things, and who knows how things will actually work out. But certainly, he and as we will also see, Martin Buber are in favor of, let's find a way to make this work with all the people who are living there right now. And he's really the first writer that we're encountering that writes this. So we're gonna have to move on. We got we'll cover a little with Martin Buber. Next page is it should be on 440, 454 we want to go to. Buber is, as I mentioned, one of the preeminent contemporary Jewish philosophers. His dates are 1878 to 1965. He's best known for writing the theological tractate I and Thou, which envisions God in a certain way. He was not a religious guy, although you might say he was spiritual. You could read that however you want. Judaism was actually very important to him, but not religious practice. He's like I said, he's a complicated theologian. I'm not going to get into his ideas about theology. He's also known for retelling the tales of the Hasidim. But what he always did was he took out the halachic lesson at the end. He sort of emasculates them by just saying, here's a great story, and it doesn't matter what it means in terms of Jewish practice. But he's born in Vienna, raised in was today called Lvov in Ukraine by his grandfather. Solomon Buber, who is also a scholar, a Jewish scholar in his own right, who's a scholar of Midrash. So he studied in Vienna and all over Germany, founded a Zionist group when he was at the University of Leipzig. He worked for Herzl at the magazine Die Welt in 1901, but he soon broke politically with Herzl for various reasons. He was interested more in the cultural aspects of Zionism than the political activity of Herzl. He founds the Lehrhaus with Franz Rosenzweig, another important contemporary Jewish philosopher, in the 1920s, and he taught at the University of Frankfurt. 1938. Now, what's happening in Germany and Frankfurt by 1938? It's amazing that he waited this long, but the Nazis have been in power for 5 years. Finally, he leaves. Buber goes to Palestine, and he teaches at Hebrew University until he retired in 1951. He lives until 1965, and one of my teachers at JTS, Rabbi Ed Feld, once called his house to have a conversation with Martin Buber and spoke with him. So he met with him. In any case, along with Judah Magnus and Henrietta Sold, he participated in this group called Ichud, which advocated for a binational state. But Buber's very interested in sort of our relationship with God and our faith and what that means for us. So very quickly, I'll read this one. 454, we're at the bottom here. We have only one way to apprehend the positive meaning of this negative phenomenon, the way of faith. From any viewpoint other than faith, our inability to fit into a category would be intolerable as something counter to history and counter to nature. But from the viewpoint of faith, our inability to fit into a category is the foundation and meaning of our living avowal of the uniqueness of Israel. So it's very important to Buber to understand that we need a place to belong, that exile is a spiritual state, and that Israel ultimately is about belonging, and that we have to acknowledge that the uniqueness of this, again, I know this is high-minded stuff, but it's interesting, that the uniqueness of Israel is our sense of belonging to this place and to this tradition. We would differentiate this uniqueness from the general uniqueness we attribute to every group and every individual. The uniqueness of Israel signifies something which in its nature, its history, and its vocation is so individual that it cannot be classified. This is very Buber-esque. Let me say there's the resonances of I and thou in this. Go flip over to 455. By the way, you can see I did write down this is written in 1934. It's a piece called The Jew in the World. I should have mentioned that earlier. Middle of 455. The striving for security is familiar to us, Jewish security, not just in Israel, but around the world, is familiar to us from the history of the ancient Hebrew state, which presaged the insecurity of the diaspora in a rather curious way. Wedged between Egypt and Babylonia, the two great powers of the ancient Orient, this state attempted time and again to overcome its geographical and political insecurity by employing power politics. Driven by the hope of overcoming its insecurity, it veered and compromised now with one side, now with the other. The actual political content of the prophets is a warning against such false security. What he's talking about is what we see in many of the books of the prophets of the Tanakh, this idea of, we're hoping for Egypt to be our allies to save us from the from the Assyrians or the Babylonians, or we're hoping for the Babylonians to be our allies, but that never works out. And so the Jewish history has been this continual search for security, and we are unique in that regard. In that ultimately we can only rely on ourselves and our uniqueness as a people. Let's go on just a little more. To go over to page 459. This is from a different article about a different piece called Hebrew Humanism. And he says the following: Hebrew humanism, basically, he says, it comes from the Bible. It's like sort of the fundamental humanism of our tradition. Okay, the words of the Creator in the way that God gave us divine direction. So he says the following: I am setting up Hebrew humanism in opposition to that Jewish nationalism which regards Israel as a nation like unto other nations and recognizes no task for Israel save that of preserving and asserting itself. But no nation in the world has this as its only task, for just as an individual who wishes merely to preserve and assert himself leads an unjustified and meaningless existence, so a nation with no other aim deserves to pass away. So we have a task, says Buber. We have a holy task, and that is what he calls Hebrew humanism. By opposing Hebrew humanism to a nationalism which is nothing but empty self-assertion, I wish to indicate that, at this juncture, the Zionist movement must decide either for national egoism or national humanism. And so he's saying that, okay, folks, we've got to be careful of the nationalism here. Now, remember, he's writing in 1934, so this is much later than any of the earlier stuff that we read about the sort of the origins of Jewish nationalism in Europe. But Buber is cautioning and saying we have to be careful here. We can't just rattle swords. we have to think about our holy role, the role that God has given us. I'm going to actually leave Buber here. The only other thing you have here, actually, I copied everything from Buber from the book. So if you want to read his letter, open letter to Mahatma Gandhi, is a very interesting read, and he does talk about at the end on page 465. He does discuss, and if anyone wants a copy, by the way, anyone who's online, I'll leave copies at the front desk at Beth Shalom, so that you can pick it up and read it at your own leisure. The more fertile this soil becomes, he ends with, the more space there will be for us and for them, meaning the Arabs. We have no desire to dispossess them. We want to live with them. We do not want to dominate them. We want to serve with them. So Buber is this voice of consciousness and humanism, echoing across Zionism in the 20th century. I'm going to do the following now. So the last little bit, the little surprise that I have for you is a musical Zionist presentation. That I'm going to share with you. So last time, Sabina, who is not here today, had asked about, are there any women in this amongst all these Zionists? And the answer is yes. There are a few. Herzberg did not include any of them, but Gil Troy does in the newer version, the Zionist ideas. And one of them is the poet, whose name is Rachel Blufstein. Her dates are 1890 to 1931. She first visited Israel in 1909, and she worked at Kvutzat Kinneret, where, by the way, I worked as a volunteer in the year 1999, so a whole 90 years after Rachel first got there. But she is moved by the labor Zionist movement, and so she people in the Zionist world in Israel at the time encouraged her to write poetry. She comes to be known as Rachel HaMeshoreret, Rachel the poetess. She's also famous for having died of tuberculosis, which is really sort of tragic. She died at a young age. She was only 41. And her grave, which I have visited many times, is up at the Kinneret Cemetery, which is on the shore of the Kinneret, not far from Kvutzat Kinneret, where she had worked. But one of her most famous poems is Ve'ulai, and perhaps. And the words mean the following, and I'm going to sing it for you because this is one of my favorite tunes. So perhaps these things never happened, and perhaps I did not rise with the sun to toil in the garden, to work it with the sweat of my brow. Perhaps, Ve'ulai, perhaps in the long and hot days of harvest, on top of a wagon loaded with sheaves, I did not raise my voice in song. Ve'ulai, perhaps I was never purified in the silent indigo of my Kinneret. Oh, my Kinneret, was it you, or have I dreamed a dream? Kinneret, by the way, of course, the Sea of Galilee. Just make sure everybody's clear on that. Okay, so it goes like this. Ve'ulai, lo hayu hadvarim me'olam. Ve'ulai, me'olam. לא השכמתי עם שחר לגן לעובדו בזיעת אפיו. מעולם בימים ארוכים ויוקדים של קציר, במרומי עגלה מוסת אלומות, לא נתתי קולי בשיר. מעולם לא טהרתי בתכלת שוקתה ובתום, של כנרת שלי, אוי כנרת שלי, היית חלמתי חלום, של כנרת שלי, אוי כנרת שלי, היית חלמתי חלום. So was it real, all that work, working by the sweat of my brow, or was it just a dream? Says Rachel. And we're going to close with that. We're going to say Kadish Rabbanan, which is our tradition here, for concluding a passage of study. I want to let you know that I will be talking a little bit more on share screen. I will be talking about this material, some of this material at the Tikkun Leil Shavuot at the JCC in and oh no, where is it? On the first night of Shavuot. Can you all see the words there? No? No, let me try that again. If you need the words for Kadish Rabbanan, it's in the book. We're going to there it is. Okay, let's try that now. Okay, good. But of course, you've all been through this class, so it might be worth your while to go to a different session and not mine. But and because I've only got 50 minutes, and who knows what I'm going to be able to teach in 50 minutes at the JCC. So Kaddish Rabbanan, which is traditional, as I said, for concluding a period of study. It's on page 111 in the book, or page 38. That also works. Okay. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא תברא קירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ויומכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה בריחום לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי הון ועל כל מאן דעסקין באורייתא די ואתרא הדין ודי בכל אתר ואתר יהא להון ולכון שלמה רבה חינה וחיסדה ורחמין וחיין אריכין ומצונה רווחה ופורקנה מן קודם אבהון דבשמיא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו וברחמיו יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. So thank you all so much for coming and learning with me today and over the course of these 5 sessions. I hope that I gave you a little taste of Zionism and how it unfolded in the 19th and 20th centuries and what lessons we might draw from it today. If anybody has ideas about what you think the luncheon learned, this is a long-standing program. I'm doing this now for this would be my, I think, the 10th year. So if you got ideas about what you'd like to learn next, let me know, and I'll see you in November, if not sooner. Have a good night. Take care. Thank you for joining us. Take it easy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks.
See you soon. I saw there's signature. Okay. Sorry. See you soon. Okay, I gotta stop recording. And
Yes, I have to drive kids.